Hello, wonderful people! Welcome back. This is now part 3 of Byron talking about queer theology, specifically connections with the Bible. So we talked about Sodom and Gomorrah a lot, and now we're going to talk about Leviticus. My Bible is in Ezekiel, so Leviticus. There may be some things that I talked about in the Sodom and Gomorrah about ancient ideas of sex and patriarchy that could have gone in this one. So this one might be shorter and that one longer. We're going to start with... Maybe we should start with, like, what is Leviticus and what even is the law and stuff. So... as Jewish people like to do, I will summarize the Old Testament and God's story with people. So God created people. And I read it, I think it was on Instagram or something today. Genesis was like, God made people. God was like, don't do the thing, the stuff. And the snake was like, do the stuff. And the people were like, okay. So God was like, what's up? And they were like, we did the stuff. And God was like, okay, well, out of the garden now. And then Abraham came along. Skip a bunch of years. Abraham came along, and God gave Moses a bunch of specific law. Abraham came along, and God gave Abraham a bunch of specific things to do, like circumcision. And God was like, don't do the thing. And Abraham was like, oh, sorry, I did the thing. The thing being sin in general, obviously. And actually, I don't think that that a relationship with God is about sin management. I think that actually is more to do with our relationship with ourselves. That's saying a lot. But I mean, honestly, do straight people have to like reassess the entire definition of what they think sin is just because of their like of who they love? So anyway, just gonna put that bug in your ear. Like sin, there's a lot of different biblical concepts of sin. There's a lot of different biblical concepts of like spiritual powers, including like particularly the devil. There's like 4 different. There's a couple different understandings of what the devil is, or what hell is, or what sin is. Not least of which just because the Old Testament to New Testament transitions through languages, and that comes with cultural understandings. So like the New Testament idea of hamartia or hamartia as sin, like, is missing the mark. Missing the mark of what? God's desire. God's desire for what? Rules? No, like goodness in general. And like our own goodness. What? We're gonna like offend God somehow? I mean, yes, with idolatry. And there's a lot more that might be idolatrous, I think, than we often talk about or realize. Whether it's idolatry of, and I'm going to sound like it's some middle school youth leader, whether it's like idolatry of popularity or idolatry of connectedness, idolatry of self-image, idolatry of even the Bible. Anything we put in front of God, anything we put between God and ourselves is idolatry, including, as Adam and Eve found out, clothes. Like, or culture, or so many things. Like, sin, anyway, sin is big. For having spent a ton of money on a degree for theater, I'm still not a really great, like, storyteller or presenter. I hope you're enjoying this. I'm enjoying making it. That's a brief aside. So anyway, with all of the like the things that God told us not to do, there was a whole bunch of like laws. And Leviticus, Exodus has a lot of them. Leviticus has a lot. Numbers has a lot. These are the books of the Bible that, like, if people start reading the Bible from like cover to cover, this is where they stop. Leviticus, because it's just so boring. Other parts of the Bible are like historical or like poetry or something, but this one's really boring. However, it's kind of not in some ways. It also is in many ways. So, the idea of like the thing. So then Jesus comes and he's like, okay, so like God and I talked about it. Like, we know you did the thing, but like, it's okay. Please stop doing the thing, which is sin, which is hurting ourselves and each other. Um, and then Jesus goes up and dies and comes back and goes up. And then Paul is all like, hey, so love Jesus. And like, because of that, don't do the thing. Um, and people are like, we did the thing. And Paul's like, okay, guys, like, oh. And then John is all like, okay. So like one day, Jesus is going to come back and we'll all stop doing the thing. But in the meantime, like, stop doing the thing. So sin is super important. Since I talked so long about like penetrative patriarchal like sex and the like Sodom and Gomorrah story, I might as well go a little bit more theoretical in this one. That sin is really important. Sin is big enough for God to have come down and died for the like forgiveness of it. Like way early on in Genesis, there's this idea of like the sacrificial lamb and the scapegoat, used later by Moses in the desert and stuff. And it's a way to like continue to exist in this broken world, and it's this. Frankly, I think it's pretty accommodationist. I have just a general belief that God is relatively accommodationist to our limitations. Right? I mean, it's this classic thing like if we knew everything, we'd be God. No, certainly we wouldn't. You could be omniscient and still not be God. There are plenty of like Zeus is by no means omniscient. Like that's actually the theme of like a lot of mythology is that like gods are by not necessarily like you don't become God just by knowing everything. So I mean that was a lie of the devil, way early on. No, another like odd comment about sin is it a bad thing to be like God? Well, yes and no, right? Like Lucifer fell because Lucifer wanted to like replace God, wanted to be like God. In essence, like that's kind of a compliment. What is it? Mimicry is the highest form of flattery. And Adam and Eve also like wanted to be like God because of their like insecurity about not being like God, which we're not. And I don't know if the solution is like being okay with that or whatever. Okay, so my friend and I are gonna like have a podcast when I get to seminary, and it's gonna be so fun, but it's also gonna be a lot like this. So sorry or not sorry, I can't tell yet. Sin, hamartia, missing the mark. Oh, I think I wrapped up that little don't do the thing. Oh, sin is bad. But it's not like the point. God is so much bigger than sin. And there's this huge insecurity of like, well, if you're like good with God, then you won't like sin anymore. Well, that's not true. Like that's kind of a heresy. For all have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. And like being a Christian doesn't automatically make your life better or like stop you from sinning. That's because being a Christian should be about relationship. So yeah, sin sucks. And accommodationist. Okay, whew, brain. Here we go. Right, if God were to like reveal all of God's stuff to us, it wouldn't necessarily make sense. That's kind of the image that I said last time of like incremental steps, baby steps. I think we do know. I think we, by definition, understand more. By definition of the incarnation of Jesus into flesh, like we understand more about God than Abraham did. I mean, it's kind of like understanding about science. Like I know more science than Isaac Newton did. I have a degree in ocean science, but in order to like get that, I needed to do calculus, right? Like standing on the shoulders of giants, looking for the fingerprints of God. So I'm a firm believer in like the intersection of science and faith and stuff. But standing on the shoulders of giants, like, to what end? it's not this Tower of Babel, so we will become God thing. It's so we will be more like God here. We don't need to go anywhere to, understand God better and look more like God. We need to go inside and go to our neighbors and stuff. That's why, I talked about my history and experience as a missionary, like the brokenness of the world. My own within my own experience, within my own family, within my own friend group, within my own like society, and within our own like human condition. Like that's what sin is. So anyway, there's like ways to deal with it, and one of those ways might have been, thousands of years ago, like making sure that women were taken care of by having a male heir. What are the ways that you have, was God gonna like completely reveal gender equity? No, I guess not. Maybe God tried, and that's a huge like tragedy. That's so hard. To accommodate in many ways is to be imperfect, or is to represent imperfection, or to like be okay with imperfection. What does that mean for a perfect God to like be okay with or tolerate levels of imperfection? Right? Even Jesus later on was like, hey, I have more to teach you, but you can't handle it now. So we don't even have everything that Jesus did. Was it John chapter 21 says that if everything Jesus did were to be written down, it would fill the whole earth. And before that, I think John 16, Jesus says, like, I have more to tell you, but you can't handle it. So, hence the Holy Spirit, which is why Christianity is a living religion. This is a living, breathing book. Yes, like something in, let's see, Ecclesiastes. I just turned to it. One of my favorite books. It might have been written thousands of years ago to a specific people at a specific time for a specific reason. But I might find something in it that speaks directly to me. That is a living text, right? And that's not, only the Bible. There are secular songs and all sorts of things that like speak to me, and like just to me, and somehow simultaneously other people. So anyway, sin, big deal. Probably not a big deal to God. And Paul is all insecure about that as well. He's like, well, because sin abounds, grace abounds more. Should we then like sin more to make grace abound more? By no means. No, I get it. Like, you're very insecure of people taking advantage of that, like, caveat of what grace is. I don't think God is as concerned about it. And I mean, we should be concerned about it. But I think a well-intentioned person like takes care of a lot, not all of it, but takes care of a lot of the like fear of that by just thinking about it and like having the good intentions. And a fun thing about intent versus impact, because this is really important for the way people talk about homosexuality. They feel like they're like, I'm just speaking the truth in love, and that's not what that verse means. Like, people use that verse to like tell their friends that they smell bad, or like that they disliked something that they did. Like, that's not the truth. The truth is the truth of the gospel, the truth of who Christ is, and to say that lovingly. And the way, the single most thing that people in America, young people particularly, think about the church, if they're not part of it, and maybe some that are even part of it, think that it is hypocritical and like on its own power trip type of thing. And one of the first like characteristics, attributes that comes to mind is that they are homophobic, right? That, among other things, like, I think this is a huge issue, one of the biggest to like face the church in hundreds of years. But if we didn't represent Christ so freaking poorly, I don't think we'd be having this issue of like declining churches and stuff. It always reminds me of this, like, because of you, the Bible says, God says to people through the prophets, because of you, my name is blasphemed among the nations. So, I've heard, conservative Christians worry about when people like abandon the faith, and I get it. Um, like apostasy is like a big thing, but if someone has been lying to you and misrepresenting Christ to you your whole life, or like they start to once you start to dig into it, because like Christians feel sometimes that they need to like disbelieve science because the Bible is more important than science. It's like, so okay, that's a weird logical fallacy to employ. Um, anyway, we're just like driving people away because of our unnecessary views. Um, so I have feelings about that. Sin. List of sins. Okay. Yeah? Okay. Leviticus now. Here we go. Sorry. Leviticus has a bunch of rules. They're split into a bunch of different categories. Some of them are cleanliness rules. Some of them are like chronic leprosy. Wow. Boils, burns, a rash, loss of hair, regulations for lepers, like purification of lepers. I'm going through like Leviticus 12, 13, 14. Sexual impurities of men in chapter 15. Of women later in that one. The Great Day of Atonement. Like, some of them are cultural things, right? Like, hey, you should let slaves go every once in a while. So, I mean, that's another thing. Like, does the Bible ever envision a world without slavery? No. There's a lot of stuff in the Bible that, like, totally thinks that slavery is normal. Does God think slavery is normal? No. Right? That was our messing that up. I'll make constant comments comparing these kind of like misinterpretation narratives. Or like the way women are treated, or like women preaching in the Bible and stuff, or nowadays. Okay, so this is important. It's hard to like wrap up what Leviticus is. There's hundreds of laws in the Bible, yo. Something like 600 or 700 laws in the Bible. And the simple thing to say, people often say like, oh, like we don't eat pork anymore. Or, like we eat pork and they didn't eat pork, and like we don't do circumcision and they did circumcision. And like that's an easy way out, and frankly it's totally fine. It's like true. We are not bound by the law anymore. So like the Leviticus stuff is not where we should like end on this. But we do need to like hit it along the way, because then people also turn and they say like, oh, well, what about like the 10 Commandments? Like, do we have to follow those? And the answer is kind of like, yeah. Why? Because they're moral laws. They're not cleanliness laws. They're not laws about how to like govern a culture. They kind of span cultures. And they're not the only ones that do. There are plenty of others that do. But this is one of the ways to like pick and choose. And even like, so when Peter and Paul like kind of agree, and it's like, oh, like they don't have to follow the laws anymore. Paul is still even like, yeah, but still don't like no sexual immorality and no eating meat sacrificed to idols. And then he like kind of comes back on this like meat sacrificed to idols thing. And even if he didn't, like, that's not a thing anymore. Or even if it is, like, we don't think about it that way. It's just kind of not a thing anymore. Now, if someone wanted to like dedicate some meat to like a demon and then eat it in honor of that demon, like that would be bad according to like those same rules and laws and things. But it's not bad because there's a law against it, right? Like running a red light is not like you follow a law because it keeps you safe, and you understand like why a law exists, right? Again, I'm not being terribly ecumenical here in my like specific examples, but I hope to be rather ecumenical in my understanding of like the value of spirituality and the grasp and seek that the search that everyone kind of has for God. So like ideas of sacred animals. Well, if people in India killed all their cows for meat, then they wouldn't have like the sustenance, or like a long time ago they wouldn't have had the sustenance. Like cows produce fuel, cows produce milk, like they're helpful for work and things. Similar Jewish laws, like you eat pig in the desert, you're gonna die, right? You eat shrimp in the desert, which is where these laws, the context in which all these laws were written, like you're gonna die. These health laws, like, we're living in this COVID time, and like if we followed Leviticus laws with all of this stuff, like this is where the idea of quarantine like came from, right? Like these aren't just stupid laws. I'm saying like I value Leviticus really highly, and it has its place. Technically, I mean, this shows you how important Leviticus is. The verses I'm going to talk about are in Leviticus 18 and 20. Well, Leviticus 19 is and Numbers, like these are the two chapters when the people ask Jesus, what are the two most important laws, right? We're doing the same thing they were. What are the important laws, Jesus? Jesus says, love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, and soul, and love your neighbor as yourself. Neighbor as yourself. Sound familiar? That's that whole like hospitality, like Sodom and Gomorrah, like the real message of what that is. The love your neighbor as yourself verse comes from Leviticus chapter 19, smack dab in the middle of the two like gay people are bad verses. And love your God comes from Numbers. Like these are important books. By no means am I just saying like throw them out or like they're irrelevant or anything. I hope I've made my point clear that like if something is morally relevant, in general, like then it's probably good to keep it, but we're not following laws just because they're laws. The idea of sin, like we're following laws because actually this is God's way of communicating to us like what is actually good for us and good for, I mean, not necessarily like good for God, because there's nothing we can do to like hurt God. God has chosen to take all of that on God's self. Okay. Whew. 18, rules for conjugal relationships. See, even, okay, but I'm just jumping back. Leviticus 17 verse 29 says, this shall be a perpetual law for you. I don't know if that's referring to the one above it or below it, but the one above it is something about washing your clothing and then returning to camp. If you lead your goat to Azazel, is that the demon? Or is that a place? Or, maybe, is that an eternal law? Okay, I could follow that law pretty effectively for the rest of eternity. Or is it this next one? On the 10th day of the 7th month, you must fast and refrain from work, the native and the stranger who lives among you. So everyone. For this is the day on which the rite of atonement shall be performed over you to purify you before Yahweh will clean. Before Yahweh, you will be clean of all your sins. It shall be a Sabbath rest for you, and you are to fast. This is a perpetual law. Okay, the Bible says this is a perpetual law, and we don't follow it anymore. What does that mean? For like biblical stuff. Maybe this will be a long video. I haven't even started talking about actually like the verses in Leviticus. Okay, I'm going to now jump into this. Chapter 18, rules for conjugal relationships. This is going to be weird. This is just a weird chapter in general. Yahweh spoke to Moses and said, speak to the sons of Israel and say to them, this is really important, this context. I am Yahweh your God. You must not behave as they do in Egypt, where you once lived. You must not behave as they do in Canaan, where I am taking you. You must not follow their laws. You must follow my customs and keep my laws. By them you must lead your life. I am Yahweh, your God. You must keep my laws and my customs. Whoever complies with them will find life in them. Find life. Follow laws, find life. This isn't like following rules about stoplights. Or it is like following rules about stoplights. Why do we do that? Is because like that's the way we make sure that we're safe. Like natural consequences. The artificial consequence of not following a stoplight is going to prison. The natural consequence is, or like being arrested. The natural consequence is dying in a car crash. Like that second one is far more compelling to me. So, okay, verse. It says, I am Yahweh. Verse 6. None of you may approach a woman who is closely related to him to uncover her nakedness. I am Yahweh. Oh, fun thing. Sorry. So uncover nakedness. That's another like biblical term that is often used to talk about having sex with. So in Genesis, early on, 8, 9, whatever it is, after the flood, Noah gets drunk after he plants a vineyard, and which, if you thought it was impressive for like God to teach a man how to build a boat, like for God to like teach a person all the instructions of like how to make alcohol for the first time, like whew. I'm just kidding. So anyway, he's drunk in his tent, and his son comes in and reveals his nakedness. So complex story. Like, is that the first gay thing to happen in the Bible? Because to reveal nakedness elsewhere is used as to have sex with. Now, the reason for this was, of course, like manly shame and patriarchy again, and things like that. And a lot of these have things to do with incest, which we're about to like get into in this Leviticus chapter, and in chapter 20 as well. Some people think it means that Noah's son castrated him, which also has relevance to like queer things. And anyway, so just fun like connecting facts. Okay, so none of you may approach a woman who is closely related to him to uncover her nakedness. I am Yahweh. You must not uncover the nakedness of your father or mother. She is your mother. You must not uncover her nakedness. The connection here, a lot of these are related by closeness, likeness, too much likeness. Wow, I forgot how complex like Leviticus is, how interconnected it is. I'll just read through it and get back to that idea. It just kind of says like, she is your mother. Don't do it. Like that's the rationale. Like, okay, well, I'll come back to that. You must not uncover the nakedness of your father's wife. It is your father's nakedness. No, I'm just going to do it now. Okay, so that verse, like, don't uncover the nakedness of your father's wife. That is his nakedness. Like, there's an idea here about, like, property, like, belonging. If you have sex with someone, like, they have something of yours. Paul kind of talks about stuff kind of like that, right? Like, the rights over your own body belong to your spouse, both ways. Once you're married, and not without regulation as well. Yeah, that's important to remember. So again, since we know the patriarchal idea is treating a man like a woman, there's another story in Genesis where one of the sons of Israel, because there's 4 like mothers of Israel, so Jacob marries Leah and Rachel, I think, and they have 2 concubines. And one of the sons of one of the mothers has sex with either one of the other mothers or one, so like his aunt essentially / mother essentially, or one of her concubines. And that's not an insult to her. I mean, in reality, shouldn't it be? It's an insult to his father. I think it was actually the eldest son, and he like loses his rights as a son because of that. So this is similar, like that the issue is having sex with someone who has had sex with someone. So anyway, that's the issue. It's your father's nakedness. because that's worse than your mother's nakedness somehow. You must not uncover the nakedness of your sister, whether she is your father's or your mother's daughter. Whether she is born in the same house or elsewhere, you must not uncover her nakedness. What interesting, like, caveats or like extra details. Obviously, those are important. Just proving again, like, there's stuff that I certainly don't understand, and I don't think we in general understand about this. Verse 10: You must not uncover the nakedness of the daughter of your son, or the daughter, for their nakedness is your own. So don't have sex with your grandchildren. You must not uncover the nakedness of the daughter of your father's wife, born of your father. She is your sister. You must not uncover her nakedness. You must not uncover the nakedness of your father's sister, for it is your father's flesh. So again, the insult comes back to it being an insult to your father. It's irrelevant, according to this, essentially, whether or not it's an insult to her. You must not uncover the nakedness of your mother's sister, for it is your mother's flesh. So there is something paternal about this, and that gets back to like Genesis, which we'll get to way later, as in like creation story. You must not uncover the nakedness of your father's brother. You must therefore not approach his wife, for she is your aunt. So that kind of has like some gay implications, but it's not that. Yeah. I actually don't know much about. I've never thought about that one. Verse 14. Don't have sex with your uncle. You must not uncover the nakedness of your daughter-in-law. She is your son's wife. You must not uncover her nakedness. You must not. This is now 16. You must not uncover the nakedness of your brother's wife, for it is your brother's nakedness. You must not uncover the naked, except of course if it's like levirate marriage. So there's like exceptions in that case. I'm not saying I'm by no means a proponent of incest. I think we need to actually just like look deeper at what these laws are actually saying. You must not uncover the nakedness of a woman and her daughter too. A vulgar term, but like that's the idea of like Eskimo brothers. Like if you have sex, if two people have sex with the same person, like separately, presumably. Okay, now we're getting into it. The second half of Leviticus 18:17. You must not take the daughter of her son, or the daughter or her daughter, to uncover their nakedness. They are your flesh. It would be incest. So, yeah, I'll talk a little bit about incest right now. I do a lot of work with plants. Currently, I'm doing all sorts of things with bonsai trees. It's very cute. And one of the things when you prune a tree is you cut all the branches that are going down and in. There's a form of like unhealthiness and I would say essentially incest when like things get too close. So there's a guy named Robert Gagnon who wrote a really mean book. Essentially, I think I haven't read it. I've read tons of summaries on it, and I think I understand some of his main points. It is a point against me that I haven't read it. It'd be a slog. But he has an idea. So by the way, like I hope to be very honest about what I know and what I don't know, and what I've read and what I haven't read and stuff. I just operate as like a synthesizer, like, that, I take a lot of information in and I like weave it together somehow, and sometimes I come up with new ideas. After a while, I seem to have accumulated a lot of them. So Gagnon talks about closeness. It's one of his main theories that the issue with homosexuality is that it is a sin of like too much likeness. Male is too similar, and so it's like not a valid combination. That male female is complementary, and like complementarity is really such a new, relatively new idea, especially biological complementarity. Essentially, however, I would say I agree with this line of thinking. However, I don't think it's biological likeness that is the issue. It's relational likeness. And there's all sorts of reasons for that. Like, biology is important. God made male and female, but also everything else. I don't think God's a huge stickler for, like, binaries. We'll get into that again, like, way later, if I can remember all of this. God is a relational God. What even gender does God have? The Bible says like he all over the place. but there's some places that talk about that reveal like feminine attributes of God, whether it's breasts in Song of Solomon, or Jesus, Jerusalem, Jerusalem, how oft have I, as a mother hen, wanted to gather you under my wings. Even wisdom in the Old Testament is viewed as a she. Wisdom is the old, I don't know the Hebrew word for it, but it's the old word that was then eventually used in Greek as logos, wisdom, or reason. So that's the Spirit of God, the Word of God, the logos. Is it et en arche logos or something in Greek? Oh, look, I'm a nerd. So this, like, the Spirit of Jesus is represented in the Old Testament as being feminine. Like, what does that mean for gender and complementarity and stuff? Beyond that, let's get to Revelation for a second. This will come up later. Like, there's no marriage in heaven. We're all going to marry God. We're all going to marry Jesus one day, according to Revelation chapter 19. I'm a guy, and if I marry Jesus, that'd be a little gay. Is that an issue? Well, God, like, seems to be directly in on that one. So, like, I'm going to say no. So this likeness, like gender, sex likeness, is not the issue here. The issue is relational likeness. And this is the reason God is protecting the vulnerable. So there's a kind of a spoken or unspoken rule in work situations, like don't date coworkers, don't date roommates. Why? Because if stuff gets messed up, which it likely will, you're in for a whole bunch of relational mess and some probably weird power dynamics. I think that's what the whole beginning of this chapter is about, and it goes the same with chapter 20. Don't have sex with these people, like in your family. Like the power dynamics, and I mean, you could make biological reasons of like, oh, like incest makes like birth defects and things, but like not after one generation it doesn't. Not, I mean, like seriously, most human marriages, you'll notice one form of incest that's like conspicuously missing from both of these lists, the one as well in chapter 20, is cousins. That's generally not accepted nowadays, at least in like America. There's some like states where it's not illegal. I have a friend who likes making jokes about this. But most marriages throughout human history have been between first cousins. Plenty of them in the Bible. You know, the risk of like this is kind of like biologically understood to be an acceptable amount of distance, genetically speaking. You know, but you could make arguments that like the closeness is the issue, genetically speaking. Diversity is a good thing. I totally agree with Gagnon in that sense. Like diversity is beautiful. Let's just not get a stick up our butt about like what kind of closeness. Because I don't think it's based on like anatomy. Oh, I forgot to say way early on about some of the first like theoretical questions that like guided me toward questioning whether or not the Bible actually had anything negative to say about homosexuality or God's like desire, and that is this idea of like, why would God create me to be hated? Like, why would God create me this way since I obviously can't change it? You know, I can control my behavior, but this behavior, like, desire, duality dialectic is garbage for a bunch of reasons. And I think we'll get there when we get to Romans and stuff. But this question of, like, what does God actually want is super important. And I think that's important here. So back to, like, it's not a good idea to like date within your coworkers. It's not a good idea to like date housemates. It's not a good idea to like have sex with your family for relational reasons and biological reasons. Like, sure, throw on more reasons of like why these things aren't okay. Most forms of child abuse and sexual abuse happen with someone who the victim knows. Oftentimes it happens within a family. that alone, that statistic alone, is enough to like prove to and then the issue is like the power dynamics. And an older sibling or a parent or an uncle or something has the power to abuse another. If you really want to get into like issues of consent, like I don't think minors have the like self-knowledge to consent in an informed way. I'm not the only one who believes that. So like you can have like a consensual relationship, but it's not. And the power dynamics are, and power dynamics, like protecting someone on the lower end of the power dynamic, is so obviously what Jesus is all about, what God is all about. I've explained before, like Levirate marriage is a way of protecting the woman at that time. The hospitality laws are a way of protecting this vulnerable person who would starve otherwise at that time. These incest laws are a way of protecting young people and vulnerable people within families even. Humans are not above really terrible types of abuse. So, excuse me. The idea of like too close. Relationally, like I've seen couples who like you marry someone who has the exact same ideological beliefs as you. You might be a woman, they might be a man. Like the closeness is relational, and that's the issue. That's a form of like incestuous thinking. It's like living in a bubble, like a mirror wall that just reflects what you want back at you. And like I get the critiques, like this kind of narcissistic accusation against gay people, like, oh, you just want something that looks like you. And I'll fully like admit to this kind of issue. My mother's a midwife, and she talks about like the miracle and the majesty of heterosexuality and stuff. And sometimes it's a little overwhelming. So anyway, I digress. I still haven't even gotten to the main point. I think you get the point. That the idea is relational closeness, and God is all about protecting the vulnerable one in those circumstances. Do you need a reason to not have sex with someone who might be vulnerable? Do you need a reason to not run a red light? Like, I'll give you one. Like, I'll give you an actual law that says don't do it, but you shouldn't need one. Laws are for babies. Moving on. 18. Here we go. Leviticus 18:18. You must not take into your harem a woman and her sister at the same time, uncovering the latter's nakedness while the former is still alive. You must not approach and uncover the nakedness of a woman who is unclean by reason of her monthly periods. Okay? Morally, like, why? And the answer is because of like demon blood magic. We're moving in category from verses 17 to like 18 now. We're moving categories, and you can tell because we're talking about something different now, and the vocabulary that's used. So we're talking about like relational protection to like, we're talking in to out. We're talking like inside a family to now like inside your culture. So don't have sex with a person on their period. Literally, like in ancient Canaan and Egypt, these were like blood magic things that people would do. Verse 20, you must not give your marriage bed to your neighbor's wife. You would become unclean thereby. You must not hand over any of your children. So there's another kind of transition. You must not hand over any of your children to have them passed to Molech. Passed to Molech is a way of saying burned alive as a sacrifice to a demon, specifically the one Molech. You must, nor must you profane the name of your God in this way. I am Yahweh. So this is actually a thing that happens, or happened a long time ago in those cultures as like fertility practices. You can kind of see this in like Greek myths as well. This like sacrifice of a virgin. God is like, hell no, like I'm not about that. And God proves that in the story of Abraham and Isaac. God's like, hey, you gonna sacrifice your kid to me? I mean, maybe it's a test, maybe it's a, whatever it is. And Abraham's like, yes. And I think he fails the test, right? Like, it's not, we shouldn't praise Abraham for being willing to like murder his child for like the majesty and glory of God. Like that's not a God I want to worship. And God proves that God is not that type of God. Um, that's a Jewish interpretation. There's a couple of those. Like Moses is a good Abraham is a good guy for being willing to like sacrifice even his beloved son. Beloved, like that's the first time that word is used in the Bible. Love, take your son, your only son, the one you love. First time that word is love is used in the Bible. Son, sacrifice, reminiscent of Jesus and all that. Um, anyway, so like there's Jewish interpretations that Moses actually like was a good guy. Abraham, sheesh, all these old men, was a good guy for doing that, or was actually like he failed the test, which is fine. We all fail, all things, all the time. Okay, so God here again is like, don't burn your children as an act of demon worship, please. Reminds me right now of like our president saying like, oh, please like put yourself in danger for the sake of our economy. You want idolatry? You want like kill yourself, burn your children for this demon of the economy? No. We will be judged as a nation because of this. Like, sorry, not sorry. Like, these things maybe aren't as old as we think they are. Okay, 22. Whew. You must not lie with a man as with a woman. This is a hateful thing. Other translations say an abomination. You must not lie with an animal. You would thereby become unclean. A woman must not offer herself to an animal to have intercourse with it. This would be a foul thing. Do not make yourself unclean by any of these practices, for it was by such things that the nations I have expelled to make way for you made themselves unclean. So, it is so obvious that we're talking about like demon worship practices, blood magic, like fertility magic, the gay stuff. Is fertility magic, the animal sex magic. I mean, if you want reasons that like bestiality, people always like bring up like, oh, like you want to have sex with guys, like next we're going to be legalizing bestiality. And I'm like, okay, first of all, super offensive. Like also you're an idiot for like making that comparison, because just logical fallacies, reductio ad absurdum. But also like read the context. This is like an act of maybe not even malicious demon worship. Like maybe someone could worship demons lovingly, but like not if you're sacrificing your children. Okay, so like proof, animals can't consent either. You want proof of that? Like God in the second story of creation, God makes Adam and then all of the animals, and like as an effort to like make sure that Adam is not alone. And like all of the animals, Adam's like, no, not really like equal for me. And God's like, you're right. I don't know what God, if God was like hoping that like chimpanzees would do it. But this is actually a point against Gagnon's likeness idea, that finally God made Eve, one like Adam. That likeness in this case was a good thing. Bone of my bone, flesh of my flesh. And that's actually, I'll come back to this again. It's such a big idea. Like that's not a marriage concept. That's a form of like likeness and togetherness that transcends gender all throughout the Bible. Anyway, so like the creation of woman in this case is like proof that animals aren't good for humans. I hope that's good enough for people. Although God obviously cares about animals a lot. Like the end of the book of Jonah is like, and all these people were saved, not to mention the animals too. Okay, so do not make yourself unclean. So like these nations did these terrible things. Again, is this a form of love? Is this a form of like intimacy? No, this is like demon worship, straight up idolatry of like the worst kind. Okay, so 25. The land became unclean. That's a fascinating comment. I exacted the penalty for its fault, and the land had to vomit out its inhabitants. So this word vomit and abomination are kind of linked. But you must keep my laws and customs. You must not do any of these hateful things. That's the same word, abomination. Neither native nor stranger living among you. For all of these hateful things were done by the people who inhabited this land before you, and the land became unclean. If you make it unclean, will it not vomit you out as it vomited the nation that was before you? Yes, anyone who does one of these hateful things, whatever it may be, any person doing it must be cut off from his people. Keep my rules. Do not observe the hateful practices that were observed before you came. Then you will not be made unclean by them. I am Yahweh your God. Oh my gosh. So, like, beautiful stuff. Kind of, in some way. I mean, it says an interesting fact about, like, the effect of sin. Like, that sin has real consequences. That, yes, the world is broken and fallen. Like, all of creation fell when Adam and Eve sinned. And, like, there's other things we can do to, like, make the earth even more unclean. Like, I took an environmental class. There's a professor named Dave Montgomery who wrote a book called Dirt, or The Story of Dirt or something. And he basically traced the fall of empires to the way that they treat the land. Like, empires don't, like, the US included, empires don't last more than a couple hundred years, because something about an empire is intrinsically harmful to creation, and people abuse their soil. The Roman Empire, I mean, why do you think early civilizations and agriculture and things were all built on river valleys? It's because you get flooding, and like, that's where nature has the most power to protect itself and rejuvenate itself. You know, the way that we treat our land, it will vomit us out. Sheesh. If young Byron could hear himself now, like, I'm such a little apocalypse boy. Okay, so I'm gonna jump ahead to 20, and I'll read the same basic stuff. And then we'll jump back and see what this kind of we'll dig into this abomination language. Yahweh spoke to, so there's a note 20. Penalties, offenses against true worship. Woo! Also, I attended a lecture by Laurie Brenner a while ago that talked about holiness in this really beautiful kind of new way that we think of holiness. Typically, we often think of holiness as this, like, separation from badness. But in fact, God uses holiness. Her big point was that where do these, like, homosexuality laws come up in the Bible? And they're often around these holiness codes. I think they're also around national representation, your image. Don't do as they did in Canaan, or even Paul says, like, don't do some of the things that the Romans did. Like, it's about image. Paul says, don't just not sin, but also avoid the appearance of sin. And I think that's a really important thing in general. Yeah. So, but the idea of holiness is actually God. God seems to view holiness as an act of coming close, God entering into darkness. For the purpose of, like, rejuvenation and becoming close to God. Okay, 20. Yahweh spoke to Moses and said, "Tell the sons of Israel, any son of Israel or any stranger living in Israel must die if he hands over any of his children to Molech." So this happens in the Bible occasionally. There's kind of two narratives that go throughout much of the Old Testament. You can see, like, there's two creation narratives. There's two, like, major books of laws. Even I mean, the Gospels, like, there's multiple accounts of, like, Jesus feeding the thousands. Like, this is, again, another one of those things that proves that, like, it's not just a chronological fly-on-the-wall kind of history book. Why repeat this stuff twice? There's I was just reading 1 Samuel, and there's a story of Saul hunting David, and David comes and, like, sneaks up behind him and, like, points out that he was here, but then doesn't kill him. And that story happens twice. Like, why? To me, it's just like another important thing to know about. Like, hey, there were people like writing this. And in fact, most of the time they didn't want stuff to be left out, so they didn't like paraphrase or simplify. They just kept both. Okay, chapter 20. I hope you're enjoying this. I really, really am enjoying this. Okay, tell the sons of Israel, don't do the Molech sacrificey baby thing. The people of this country must stone him, and I shall set my face against that man and outlaw him from his people. For in handing over his children to Moloch, he has defiled my sanctuary and profaned my holy name. If the people of the country choose to close their eyes to the man's actions in handing over his children to Moloch, and they do not put him to death, I myself shall turn my face against him and his clan. I shall outlaw them from my people, and all those after him who prostitute themselves by following Molech. Oh boy. If a man has recourse to the spirits of the dead or to magicians to prostitute himself by following them, I shall set my face against that man and outlaw him from his people. You must make yourselves holy, for I am Yahweh your God. So again, that idea of like, God's holy, so be holy. So don't sin. This video is going to be longer than an hour. Sorry. Or not. Okay, so again, like our context here is Molech again. That was another thing I was going to say. Oh, like no sorcery. And yet, like, well, and it's not a good thing, I guess. Saul, outlaws all sorcery. And that's an interesting, like, thing in the Bible, is what counts as sorcery and stuff. And mostly it's like if you are turning to other powers. You know, prayer is a form of like asking God for help. Sorcery is just asking a different power for help. So maybe, who knows? Okay, 20 verse 8. You must keep my laws and put them into practice, for it is I, Yahweh, who makes you holy. Hence, anyone who curses father or mother must die. Okay, so like at some point maybe we were thinking like, okay, well, like if you do something bad, like and it's small, like the punishment is going to be little. But like those standards don't make sense to us today, right? Like having like the death penalty, number one, isn't just, so countries that have the death penalty are bad. Yeah, I'm not above being slightly political. Oh, like, yeah, cursing your father and mother, like, that's a capital offense? Okay, well, if you really want to, like, follow the laws, that's a moral law, right? Like, we should follow that one too then, right? But no. I mean, we should follow it. We just shouldn't necessarily follow the consequence or the prescribed punishment. Okay. His blood shall be on his own head. The man who commits adultery with a married woman, the man who commits adultery with his neighbor's wife must die, he and his accomplice. The man who lies with his father's wife has uncovered his father's nakedness. Both of them must die. Their blood shall be on their own heads. The man who lies with his daughter-in-law, both of them must die. They have defiled each other. Their blood shall be on their own heads. The man who lies with a man in the same way as with a woman, they have done a hateful thing, same abomination, together. They must die. Their blood shall be on their own heads. The man who takes a woman and her mother to wife, that is incest. They must be burnt to death, he and they. There must be no incest among you. The man who lies with an animal, he must die and the animal be killed. The woman who approaches any animal to have intercourse with it, you shall kill the woman and the animal. They must die. Their blood shall be on their own heads. The man who takes his daughter of his father or mother to wife, if he sees her nakedness and she sees his, it is a disgrace. They must be executed in public. For the man is uncovered the nakedness of his sister and must bear the consequence of his fault. The man who lies with a woman during her monthly period and uncovers her nakedness has laid bare the source of her blood, and she has uncovered the source of her blood. Both of them must be outlawed from the people. I don't know what that means. You must not uncover the nakedness of your mother's sister or your father's sister. A man has thus uncovered his own flesh, and they must bear consequences of their fault. The man, oh, maybe that's like an interesting, I've only just thought of this, that maybe that's like an interesting masturbation commentary, that like uncovering your own flesh is a bad thing. I am not against masturbation in general. Fascinating. See, I'm always learning things. The man who lies with the wife of his paternal uncle. Wow, so specific. But also, like, if there's some like funky relation that the Bible doesn't outlaw, like, is that okay? No, not necessarily. Not unless you're a baby and need laws like that. I mean, my parents raised me in a way of like, if you prove to us that you need some rule, like, we'll give it to you. But also, love God, love your neighbor as yourself. Okay, blah blah blah. The man who takes to wife the wife of his brother, that is impurity. He has uncovered his brother's nakedness. They shall die childless. Ooh. Okay. The end of chapter 20, verse 22 so far. You must keep all my laws and all my customs, put them into practice. Thus you will not be vomited out by the lands where I am taking you to live. You must not follow the laws of the nations that I expel to make way for you. They practiced all these things, and for this I have come to detest them. I think that's probably the same abomination word. I have told you already, you shall take possession of their soil. I myself will give you possession of it, the land where milk and honey flow. I am Yahweh your God. I, Yahweh your God, have set you apart from these people. That's that holiness idea again. Therefore, you must set the clean animal apart from the unclean bird apart from the clean. Do not defile yourselves with these animals or birds or things that creep on the ground. I have made you and set them apart as unclean. I have made you set them apart. Conclusion. Be considerate to me, because I am Yahweh. I, Yahweh, am holy, and I will set you apart from all these peoples, so that you may be mine. Any man or woman who is a necromancer or magician must be put to death by stoning. Their blood shall be on their own heads. Interesting afterthought. So again, like, this one's a little less clear, but it starts easily in the context of like both the idolatry of Molech and the countries around, the cultures around, but also this like care of the vulnerable, and whose nakedness we are protecting. Okay, so that's important. Going back to 18 and what this, so the old word for so abomination is the word that's typically used in many translations. The Jewish word there is toebach. Toebach is a word that's used like 117 times, I think, in the Old Testament, and like it. Some people think again like, oh, if this is if it's a capital offense, then it must be super bad or extra bad. Toebach is definitely a way of identifying that something is super bad, but just like you know the way that we learn any ancient language, looking at the context in which it's used. Does it mean something specifically sexual? No, actually. The word toebach is used most of those times. I wrote a big paper on this at one point. That most of the time it is identifying something, a ritualistic foreign demon practice. So in the books of First and Second Kings, like taking a census was seen as toebach. Why? Because at that time, taking a census was wanting to have an army, and God was the king of Israel, or was the leader of Israel. So to have an army would be to be like the nations around, which, as we saw, like is the big dealio to not do. Don't be like the other nations around. Why? Because of idolatry. So toebach is used most of the time to express something that is a specific worship practice, like burning your children to a demon. So that is toebach. That is an abomination. It's not just a random word that means like, ew, gross. There's like 4 other Hebrew words for that if you really wanted them. And they're used all over the place too. So, toebach. It's used sometimes in some other books to mean like imperfect. But those are kind of like, in my opinion, they're separate by genre and like I think it's used in Ecclesiastes. It's used in Ezekiel a lot. Again, like for things that are pretty explicitly about demon worship. So, if two dudes have sex because they love each other and are like married and committed and co-equal in power and all of that stuff, that's not toebach. That's not an abomination. Um, if a heterosexual couple wanted to like worship a demon by having some like sex worship thing, that would be toebach. Like it's not related to gay stuff particularly, except that doing gay stuff was often not doing gay stuff. Sorry, like two people of the same sex having sex was a specific type of temple worship. There were male temple prostitutes in the same way that there were female temple prostitutes. Two more fun verse things. Deuteronomy 22:5, I think, is like. So this is all about like gay stuff. I haven't even touched on like trans things or gender identity things, which are super important. Actually, I think gender identity, like trans identity questions, are actually the easiest way into the Bible. This conversation around the Bible, because it's so much more clear that God is actually totally like wanting to take care of these people even more, because the extra vulnerable. Okay, so but I bring that up because chapter 20 says, the man who lies with a man in the same way as with a woman, they have done a hateful thing together. Their blood shall be on their own heads. I said, I think in the Sodom and Gomorrah story, or overview, that the issue here is actually kind of an extra form of justice, because the offensive thing is not just being awful to this prostitute or other or victim of probably a rape situation. Like that's bad enough. Like it, according to like ancient ideas, it was evil to do that to them, and it was also evil to have it done to you. So in this case, it's like both of them be dead. Again, it's kind of one of those ways of like putting a close on the issue. Like if you, this whole idea of like if you don't turn your face away from this person who's sinned, I will do it for you. To make a way of it just like not perpetuating anymore. Honestly, I don't think death is the worst thing that can happen to someone. I think toebach is much worse than death. Being that relationally far and cut off from God. So even if if God wants to like destroy the whole planet in a flood or commands people to be to like commit genocide, death is not the end, right? I'm a universalist, so frankly, I think everyone gets to heaven eventually, and the whole point of that is reunification with God. If someone goes out and is like hurting themselves, I think it's somewhat valid for like a parent to like grab a kid who's about to run out in the street by their shoulders and say like, "Stop! Look at me! You can't do that." Like I'm a nanny, and like I'm not a fan of like harsh words ever. But like if a kid is about to hurt themselves or someone else, like their attention needs to be grabbed. I'm not saying that's like a perfect answer to the horror of genocide in the Bible, but if death was it, there's some theologian who says if death is in any way a punishment, God is robbed of God's glory. So, like, I don't mean to defend genocide in any way. It's just part of the complexity of what this book and God's story and what we do to each other, that it's just all about. But also, if we all go at the same time, there's no one left to do any mourning, right? Like the idea of, yeah, I don't know. I mean, if your whole family dies at the same time, like there's no one left to be sad about it necessarily. Humanity is whack, yo. Okay, so Deuteronomy. Oh, okay, cross-dressing. Woo. So there's one verse in the Bible about cross-dressing. I think. I think it's Deuteronomy 22:5 or 22:11 or something. And it says, "A man will not wear male's clothes. A man will not wear female clothes, nor will male clothes be worn by a woman." And the point there is, again, probably again, power dynamics, but potentially like demon worship things of like, or maybe even theater. Frankly, Christians through a lot of history have not been terribly amenable to representation in theater and things. You can see similar ideas in Islam. Like representation is a powerful thing. But the fact that it says a male will not wear female clothes and male clothes will not be worn by a female, it puts the male first, so that the condemnation is on, like, it's making it clear that the abrogation, the overstepping of the boundaries of maleness is the problem there. Less so the idea of like women being empowered. There are some women in the Bible that are empowered. Judith, nope, not Judith. Judge Deborah. Yeah, among others. It's less of an issue if women look like men than if men look like women, and that like masculine fragility like persists today. Women are allowed to wear pants. Women are allowed to like act like men. It's hard. Society is not great for it, but like a pansy man, acting like a woman is much worse of an insult. Yeah, we live in a weird time. I think that's kind of it for Leviticus. Laws. Oh, there is an important connection. This will actually maybe lead us to the New Testament. A man will not. Leviticus 20:18. Nope, 20:13. A man who lies with a man in the same way as with a woman, they have done a hateful thing, they must die. So to lie with a man, the Hebrew words there, I don't know what they are, but the Greek Septuagint version of the Bible, which was written a little bit before Jesus' time, was an Old Testament translation into Greek, and it says arsenos vela koites or something, and Paul probably looked at that and combined the two and invented the word arsenokoitai, which means a man bedder, like to a man bed, to man sex, whatever. So that's a connection to the New Testament, which I think is where we're going next. This covers the first 3 clobber passages. Oh, and as I said, it's a lot. Again, I mean, you could do this whole Old Testament part by just saying like, it's the Old Testament. Who cares? We live in the new covenant. But it's important. Frankly, one of the reasons why I do all of this work is because people have done all of the work of like why slavery is bad, and there's plenty of verses in the Bible that support slavery, like 200 or 300 or something. Empowerment of women, for instance, like people use biblical reasons to like back up that, demeaning of women for millennia. And I'm having none of it, and I'm sure God is also having none of it. But like, if we don't do our homework, conservative, like dogmatic, grouchy people who feel insecure about their power and stuff in the future will be like, yeah, the Bible says like slavery is okay. The Bible says that women shouldn't be leaders. The Bible says that gay stuff is bad. If we don't do our homework of figuring out why that interpretation is wrong, sinful even, then we're just gonna like backslide. So that's why it's important. Oh, fun fact: there are 6 verses in the Bible that talk about homosexual stuff explicitly, and they all happen to be in a negative light. There are over 200 verses in the Bible that talk about heterosexuality in an explicitly negative light, and yet we don't like think heterosexuality is bad in every iteration. So why should homosexuality be bad in every iteration? just because a certain society at a certain time didn't accept it. So, anyway, fun things. That's it.